I'm Bill McFarlane. I'm chairman of Pink Elephant Communications.
And I'm Rachel Fulton, and I work as a communications trainer at Pink Elephant.
So what do we do? Well, what we've been doing today is working with some of the brightest brains on Malta, talking about communication skills. And what we feel strongly is, whatever the markets are like, whatever the financial situation's like, whatever the economy's like, we can all improve our communication skills.
Absolutely. And the most important thing is taking complex issues or subject matter and making them simple and accessible so that everyone can understand them.
And that's one of the things today, Rachel, that what people saw was you live in a world in financial services which is full of abstract concepts like structured finance, like mortgage, like debt. Now these are all words that we're familiar with, but are everybody in the audience, every single person, do they really know what these words mean? Because if not, what we've got to do is a bit of explaining. And I believe, and I'm sure this message came across clearly today, that we need to put more work in financial services because the language is often more complex.
Definitely. And also, all of these words mean different things to different people. So you could be using one word with one group, it'll mean something to them. And then as soon as you take it outside of the building you're in, it means something else. So it's about finding a visual way to describe these words. What's a way that will be really memorable, that someone, when they go to explain it to someone outside of the company, it will be easy for them to understand? And also, what will make it resonate with people? And that's something that we saw really from the beginning to the end of today, people really getting on board with. How do we talk in pictures to make these complex issues much more simple?
So when we go to the theatre, when we go to watch a television programme, any kind of drama, it's about storytelling. I believe anybody in financial services can tell a story, but we've almost got to imagine that we're now talking to our children and explaining things simply. And if we worry about that being oversimplifying, patronising, all we have to say is we start simply and we allow it to become a little more complicated as long as people get it. But people will see the Eiffel Tower, they'll see the Taj Mahal, they'll see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but when you start talking about things like debt, then it's like a fog rolling in from the sea, and people stop seeing these images. So images are so important, aren't they?
Yes, and one of the biggest parts of our theory that people push back on in the early stages is, well, what if people feel that I'm patronising them? I deal with very official senior people and they want to hear the most complex part of the story. And actually, the opposite is true. They have short time, they have shorter attention spans, as we all do nowadays. They want to know what's the most important thing the fastest and what's the most easy way that we can communicate this to our audience.
I've always found, dealing with the top people in companies, that they really want the story told simply. It's often people who are trying to impress their bosses who make it sound a little too complicated. The late Steve Jobs of Apple was a tremendous presenter, but by his own admission in the early days, he made it far too complicated. The harder you work at something, the simpler you can make it. Now, we both know that because we both worked in television. What did you find was the most important thing about storytelling in television to get the message across?
For me, and this goes for my TV work and also in my work in fiction as an author, I always wanted to have a human story to connect myself and the story with the audience. Often if you are listening to facts and figures or someone is describing something very complicated, you lose the human aspect. What does it mean to people? What does it mean to me? And you're much more likely to remember a visual human story when you go home than you are facts, figures, and statistics. So how do we make that real? An example would be when we talk about statistics for cancer, for example. 1 in 4 people will get cancer within their lifetime. That makes you think that could be my family. That could be people I know. And that visual image, that 1 in 4 people, becomes much more impactful because of the image. If we had simply used the statistics, we may have lost that human element.
A good friend of mine ran St George Bank in Australia for a few years. That was part of the Westpac group. And he headed up a mortgages division that grew exponentially in his time there. But what he said was, Some people are selling mortgages. I'm selling dream homes. Have you ever really lain in bed at night really wishing you had a mortgage? Because most people wish they had a dream home. So it's about getting that image right. Now, the flip side of that is we can talk in terms of the wrong images. So I'm going to introduce a good friend of mine, the pink elephant. There we are. Now, I introduced a concept many years ago, and our company is called Pink Elephant Communications, whereby I said to people, if you paint the wrong image, then that image will be left in someone's mind. And the not, can't, won't, don't, shouldn't in the sentence will disappear. I'll give you a classic example. There can be no whitewash at the White House. Richard Nixon, 1973. Well, there was a whitewash at the White House over the Watergate scandal. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky, said Bill Clinton, but he did. And when even a decorator who was in my house once, when there was a crash from my son's bedroom, I walked through thinking he'd fallen off the stepladders, and he said, I didn't stand on the radiator, but the radiator is on the floor and water's spilling out in all directions. These denials paint exactly the wrong image. So if we're importantly telling people, please speak in images, they've got to be the right ones. A pink elephant, by my definition, is an unnecessary negative that paints entirely the wrong picture. So if you say to someone, I didn't mean to be rude, I hope I wasn't interrupting too much, please don't think I'm being pushy, I'm thinking of rude, pushy, and interrupting. If you say to people, I thought it was very important to get across my ideas there, then you're telling people what you are doing, what you have done, and what you will do, and that takes you always to the solution, but the pink elephant takes us to the problem. So the definition again, a pink elephant is an unnecessary negative that paints the wrong picture. Simply because if I say to you, don't think of a bright pink elephant, well, guess what? That's what you see.
Absolutely. And as you say, it's much more solutions focused to talk about what you are doing, what you can do, and what you will do. And so often we are worried about what people are thinking of us. So we accidentally volunteer these pink elephants, these negatives, because we're wondering what the other person, what the audience is thinking. I didn't stand on the radiator because we're worried that that's what you think. So when we go into any public speaking, presentation, any communication whatsoever, we should instead talk about what we can do, what we have control over. And as you say, that will point towards the solution rather than focus on the problem or our emotional baggage that we are bringing to the table or to the conversation.
We learned this in television because when you write a television script for news, you're saying what has happened or what is happening or what did happen a little earlier on. But you realise that what happens when we speak to people is we have emotion getting in the way. So baggage gets in the way, upset, anything that takes us away from our goal of simply factually saying what we have done, what we are doing, what we will do. So always speaking positives. But there's another type of word that we're rather cautious about as well, the watering down word. Now, do you remember on the flight as we came over to Malta, you turned round and looked to me and we both burst out laughing because of what the captain said.
I feel bad for the captain because he was unaware that there were two communication specialists analysing what he was saying during the flight.
He needs to come on the next course in Malta.
Yes, he does, because he was using a lot of what we term as watering downwards. So if you imagine that we were to pour you a lovely dram of whiskey here in Malta, taking it from Scotland, if we poured a pint of water into that whiskey, it would dilute the strength of the whiskey, the flavour of the whiskey, all the wonderful things about it. And that's what happens when you use watering down words in your communication. And our poor captain said words like he was hopeful that we were going to land on time and maybe, and fingers crossed, we would get there.
That's the one that worried me.
Fingers crossed is one of the worst things you can hear from a pilot as you're about to take off.
So the pilot, the man in whom you have invested the safety of you want to return to your children, in my case to your grandchildren, he's sitting at the console, fingers crossed.
Hopefully with one hand on the console at least.
Well, I would rather that he had training. But of course what happens is, it's a bit of baggage. You know, he'd like to say we're going to arrive early. We did because there were good tailwinds. But what if he's wrong? And that's why the baggage comes in. And that's why we sometimes come out with quite hopefully, relatively, reasonably, fairly, I think, all these things, I'll do my best. I mean, I have said to somebody when they said, well, listen, Bill, I was doing my best. I actually said to them, but what if your best isn't good enough? And that's a dead end. This was somebody who, by the way, had taken on a bit of construction work at the house and got it all wrong. So the other one that really worries me is try. Try.
Yeah.
You know. Now, if you say you're going to try to do something,
Try to land the plane.
well, that would worry me. I mean, I was literally on a plane to South Africa once, to Cape Town, and the pilot came on and said, there's thick fog in the Cape Town area. Now I'm going to try to land the plane. Well, I turned to my wife and I said, well, either we're going to stay up here forever or he's going to crash. What do you mean you're going to try to land the plane? But then he came on 5 minutes later and he said, if you hear the engines roar when we're down at 500 feet, that means the fog is too thick. We're going up again, and I'm going to take you to Johannesburg. Now, that reassured me, because that's what was happening, rather than, fingers crossed, trying to land the plane.
But a lot of it comes from humility. So we understand why people are using these words, because rather than promising that they will have a certain outcome, they want to hedge their bets. And there's a way of upgrading that language. So rather than being too humble and making people feel unconfident in your messaging, you're able to upgrade to our language of leadership, as we call it. So that's saying things like, we strongly believe, rather than we think, or saying, I trust, rather than I hope. And all of these are minor upgrades to our language that make such a huge difference in our messaging and how it lands with our audience.
Well, could you imagine saying here in Malta, what we're trying to do is hopefully regulate the industry sensibly with any luck? Wow.
I feel
you think,
that
who's in charge here?
I feel that our workshops today would have smelled a rat on that one.
And the objective for everyone today was twofold. One, to give them confidence in presenting well, clearly, concisely, definitively, pictorially, in such a way that people could see what they were talking about. And two, to be able to overcome objections, because a presentation can be derailed when somebody asks awkward questions. So let's refresh memories on what advice we gave out today on answering awkward questions. Now, you've been a TV interviewer, so have I. What do you want from a guest when you ask a question?
Well, usually, Bill, you and I are the ones asking the awkward questions. And really, what we want everyone to understand is that the interviewee and the interviewer both want a great outcome from any interaction. And it can be really challenging when we've given a presentation and we're put on the spot and there's a question and answer session. But at Pink Elephant, we believe that there are 5 direct answers to direct questions and that you should always answer questions directly. Some things that people get very frustrated about with politicians is that they avoid the question. I'm sure you've interviewed many in your time that had that issue. And we want to really encourage people that even when the question is really tricky and they feel nervous, the best thing to do is to answer it directly rather than avoid it, because the audience always knows. They get that sense of you avoiding it, or they feel that they're losing trust in your messaging as soon as you avoid that direct answer. So we told everyone today, as we tell all of our trainees, that these direct answers are your best way forward. So that's yes, no, I don't know, it's too early to say, and I can only speak for Rachel or Pink Elephant in my case. And I don't know is the one that people tend to struggle with the most.
Why is
Bill.
that, do you think?
Because people are reluctant to admit that there's a lack of knowledge there. But we would always recommend that it is better in the moment to say, I don't know, let me find out for you. I don't know, Fiona is best placed to answer that question, rather than make something up on the spot. We've all seen politicians feel like they need to answer a question and say something that's wrong, and then that's what becomes the story in the media, a fact or figure that was missaid.
So I've always been intensely interested in journalism. I worked in local newspapers, radio, television in Scotland, television in London. I was 30 years in journalism, 25 years in broadcasting. It's 37 years since I set up this company. I've worked in 26 countries with probably 500 clients. But what I would say, Rachel, is what I know is a drop in the ocean of my ignorance. And so when I don't know something, I really start by saying, I don't know. What I have found from my experience is, and therefore I'm giving an informed answer rather than dodging it, but I'm telling the audience straight away that I don't know. And that's the point where I believe people trust you.
Definitely.
And trust is important when you give direct answers.
Preparation are also very important. So, although we encourage you to say, I don't know, we also encourage a lot of preparation going into these interviews, these question and answer sessions. You want to know your subject matter inside out, but be able to deflect to someone else or your own experience, as you've said, rather than invent things.
The other strange one for some people is it's too early to say. Now, sadly, you'll see in television at times a fire. We had one in England some years ago, the Grenfell Tower, and the wrong figure was given out at one point for the number of people who died in the fire. It was downgraded from the figure to a lower figure. Now the authorities look as if they don't know what they're talking about. So when they were asked how many people were known to have died, they should have said it's too early to say. And only one by one, as you can account for people, should you increase that number. People are sometimes afraid to say it's too early to say, especially 2 or 3 times in a row. But remember what you're doing is almost like a tug of war. Someone's trying to pull you in one direction. You want to pull them back in another direction. You've got to stick to the ground that you know rather than to be taken onto somebody else's agenda. And it's too early to say is often the right answer.
Absolutely. It also buys you time. It's a really great time buying technique if someone is asking you how long a project might take or how much something's going to cost. It's very easy to give a figure that could then be wrong or someone will then hold you to, but it's too early to say. Buys you some time in order to say we will know in future, we're yet to know it in the present.
And we think 4 times more quickly than we talk. So in saying it's too early to say, that 1.5 seconds has just bought you 6 seconds thinking time. Rarely do we think of the end of our sentence, but as long as we start down the road, knowing where we're going, we've bought ourselves that little bit of time to talk.
Yes, and you'll know this yourself from having done live reports on TV. If you know the line that you're going to say at the top of your segment and then your throwback to the studio, your brain will work out what comes in the middle. But knowing that start point and that end point are so crucial. It's something that we see often when people are presenting. They fail to understand when to stop talking. We talk about the Forrest Gump example. He grabs the American football and he runs out of the stadium and he keeps running and he keeps running rather than scoring that touchdown. So we would encourage people to know your strong call to action at the end of your presentation so that you know how to finish strongly. If you lose your way at some point during the presentation, you're able to know that that's your finish line, that's your touchdown that you want to reach.
That's an important shape to an answer. I sometimes think it's like jumping into an Olympic swimming pool. So yes, no, I don't know, it's too early to say. You're jumping into the water. Now you've got to swim to the other end. But the race is over when you touch the other end. Otherwise, you do extra unnecessary laps. So know what your end point is, get there and finish. And when you do that, the audience buys into your message more clearly. What else would you say were the highlights of what we've been discussing?
Well, I always like to see the progression from the start of the day when people are first learning the theory from us and then the presentations and the answers they give later in the day. Because as with any training session, people are, first of all, nervous at all the information that we're throwing at them. They're seeing how it applies to the media and also to their own work. And then putting it into practice is another huge task. And it was so fantastic to see everyone take it on board today and really understand why we do this training and the real benefits of it. One of the major things along with simplicity and thinking in pictures and talking in pictures is how to be concise with your messaging. So talking about the structure of your presentation or your answer. How do you lead with what's most important to your audience on that day? It's very, very easy to talk about what's important to us, to talk about our company, our goals, and lead with that in a presentation, when actually we need to be talking to and for the audience that we're giving the presentation to. What is it that they care about? We want them to be sitting in the audience knowing why they're there immediately as soon as we start talking.
So we learned that when we went into journalism, right from the first local newspapers I worked on. The first paragraph should grab the attention of the audience. And as somebody said, a good writer pins you up against the wall and keeps you there to the very end. You know, you've got to keep that. But the only way to do it is to tell them the most important thing first. I remember doing a course with academics years ago, and this academic said, well, why would I give away the results of 3 years of research in the first sentence? I said, because I'm going to fall asleep if you don't. And that, therefore, we have to give our best line away to begin with. But then in this pyramid of communication that we talk about, we structure it so the most important point is first, and then the second, and then the third, then the fourth. And it means that you can, at any point, stop reading it and you will have had the key salient points. You'll see that in any news website that's well written there. But there are 3 key questions we have to ask, first of all. What do I want to say? Who am I talking to? So therefore, how will I arrange it? You've addressed the who am I talking to. If you get that wrong, you make it all about you. If you get it right, you make it all about the audience. And the audience will stay as long as it's interesting for them. So ask the 3 questions, and then you arrange these points in terms of what's the most important to them, second, third, fourth, fifth. I remember decades ago, I was selling a story from Scotland, where I worked, to ITN News in London, in other words, broadcast to the whole of Britain. It was about a mountain rescue. 4 men had been successfully airlifted by the RAF from a snowy mountain in Scotland, and I was told I had a minute and a half to tell the story. But then some major international news story broke that day. The news editor said, Bill, it's not the lead story in ITN anymore. It's the second lead story. You've got 45 seconds instead of a minute. And I stupidly said, it can't be done. Meaning, you can't cut my precious story by 50%. And I said, it can't be done. And he said, oh, that's fine, Bill, don't do it. Put down the phone. I thought, oh, I was going to be paid money for that. And it was the second lead story. So I phoned him back, and he just said a few words to me. He said, cut it in half. Now, if it's well written in the first place, you should just draw a line through the middle. Mm-hmm. It'll be self-standing. The most important stuff's in the top half, and it's all done. But we get precious about information.
But this is applicable across all aspects of life, from the professional to the personal. I had it at my own wedding, Bill, because our best man fumbled through his speech. He failed to receive any pink elephant training prior to the wedding. And it was very long, and the whole audience were lost and groaning and hungry, and it was my speech next.
Oh,
so
no.
I used the pyramid that we talk about in my own wedding, because I stood up, I told the most important part first, the most important story, and then I said, enjoy your food, everyone. And I cut it in half. And all of my hungry relatives and friends were much happier for me having done that.
Yeah, it's simple, but the reason we have these rules and the reason we shared them on this visit is, to me, it's rather like the highway code of communication. So I was 17 when I learned to drive, but I had to study the highway code. I had to understand the rules. This is in the UK before there was such a thing as a theory test. But when I went out driving for my test, I had to know the rules. Mm-hmm. And only if I knew the rules would I be given a pass certificate. In communication, we make it up as we go along.
Yeah.
But there are really good rules from journalism, broadcasting, writing, and everything else. And if anybody in financial services just applies these rules, they will get the same good results. So we left people with the highway code of communication, including our friend the pink elephant, for people then to put into practice. And I would say, like every other kind of training, it only works if you put it into practice.
Of course. And the other main thing that we achieve today is turning people's critic in their heads into a coach.
That's a big one.
It's one thing that's so important in all of our work at Pink Elephant. How do we untrain the beliefs that people have about themselves, about their presenting skills, about their communication skills, things that have perhaps come from childhood or previous jobs, previous bosses that were nasty to them? We have to unpick that and encourage them to identify room for improvement in their own communication, but in a gentle way that encourages solutions, that encourages improvement, rather than that crippling self-doubt that will take them right back to the beginning.
I've become convinced that what we say to ourselves is what makes us happy and successful, rather than what happens in life. Because it's how we interpret it, and it's how we digest it, and how we give feedback to ourselves and build on it or knock ourselves down with it. Growing up in Scotland, there was a very critical atmosphere. And I found that there was a tall poppy syndrome. People didn't necessarily want you to share your successes out loud. But I was determined by the time my children came along, and especially my grandchildren, that they were reinforced with positive reinforcement. They were allowed to speak up. They were allowed to be positive about themselves, because we need to build a bank of positive energy, because there'll be days when we have to draw on it. And without putting anything into the bank of positive energy, you will be overdrawn on the days when you need to draw on it. So we need to build that belief. Sports people are very good at it. I was a great tennis fan when Sir Andy Murray was winning Wimbledon a couple of times. He was 2 sets to love down in a Wimbledon quarter-final, and the reporter said to him, "You looked as if you were staring defeat in the face there." And he looked at him curiously and said, "Well, I found a way through, and that's all that mattered." In other words, his inner voice said, "Andy, you can win this. All you have to do is change your tactics, do this, that, and the other." He said the same also when he beat Djokovic to win the US Open in his one success over there. He had been 2 sets to love up. It was pulled back to 2-2. He took a comfort break and he looked himself in the mirror and he said, "How much do you want to win this?" And he talked himself into winning. Now, that voice inside of our head can talk us into winning, or it can talk us out of winning. And we've got to build a positive mindset using these rules that gives us stronger mental fortitude.
Absolutely. And one of the most wonderful parts of today was listening to colleagues talk about how great the performances were of their peers. And that's one thing that it's wonderful to see throughout the day. Because yes, we can work really hard on speaking nicely and kindly to ourselves and bigging ourselves up, putting positivity in the bank. We also want to do it for our colleagues and for our peers, because as a team, our communications can improve with that type of support. And one of the wonderful things about coming and giving a pink elephant to the winner is that now all of the teams will be shouting, "That's a pink elephant," at each other, at meetings and in the office throughout the working day. And that's how we improve. We support each other.
I've heard people say they've asked for feedback after a presentation and colleagues have said, "Yeah, it was great," or "It was fine," which isn't feedback.
No.
What you really want to be able to do is dissect it. I certainly did this. I used to play back, it was videotapes in the early days. And I'd watch to see what I'd done in television, and I had 2 columns. What did I do well? What can I do better? And the name of that game is to move everything into the what did I do well column. Now, anybody can do that by playing back a recording on a phone of their presentation and their answers. And then they can see, applying these rules, what did they do well and what can they do better. It's constant feedback to yourself to build that fortitude.
But one of the biggest, most natural things that people do is immediately write down all of the bad things, all the things they hated. They talk about how they looked like their mum when they watched it back, or they sounded like their dad, or they said the wrong word here, and they really give themselves a very hard time, and they focus entirely on that list of negatives, on that list of problems. And that's why we always frame it that it's room for improvement, ways that we could change or ways that we'd like to change our performance, rather than things that were wrong, things that were bad. And we always lead with positivity at Pink Elephant.
Well, I learned a lesson from the producer of World's Strongest Man, which I presented for 3 years, a BBC programme. And every night he'd sit down at the end of the day's filming and he'd say, "Right, here's what you did well." And he'd be very specific about it. "Here's what you can improve on." After 3 nights, he said, "Why'd you lift your pen when I say here's what you can improve on? Why'd you not write down what you did well?" And I said in that Scottish way, "Well, it's just my job." He said, "No, listen, Bill, your job is to write down today what you did well so you can do it well again tomorrow. We'll build on that. And then we'll start to work on your weaknesses." That was singularly the most encouraging thing that was ever said to me, and changed my whole mindset about how to analyse my performance. That is something anybody can do.
And also, you know yourself, if someone tells you that you are good at one specific thing, you become better at that by the very merit of feeling better about your performance. And with that type of encouragement, that type of support from your colleagues, from your peers, you'll see your communication improve across the board. So we always encourage colleagues to give positive feedback to the presenter, and also to give them critique that helps them forward, rather than something that's going to shut down their confidence.
And here's what I'd say about improving your presentation skills and your ability to answer awkward questions. It puts you in a position to be promoted in your organization. It makes you a very good candidate for the job. How can you explain what it is you're wanting to achieve without good presentation skills? If you get promotion, if you earn money, it improves your life chances and choices. It's all an upward spiral. Now, or you can walk away and say, that was an interesting seminar without putting anything into practice. But that little bit of self-development can go a long way. And in an era when there's a lot of squeeze on economies around the world, here's something that is virtually free. And I always think that when somebody writes a book and puts down their life's experience into a book, and it's perhaps less than €10 for that book, just to buy that book or download it and take one thing away from it, and to do that with 10, 20, 30, 40 books, gives you an excellent highway code of communication, learning from the best of people's experience.
Yes, and we work today with people who were doing elevator pitches. So they're able to condense that information using the pyramid structure to help them. And those pitches can be used in any boardroom, at any meeting in future. They can be used in your emails in order to achieve what it is you want to achieve, whether that's professionally or personally. The tools that we gave people today can be drawn upon across all aspects of their life. And as you say, it makes opportunities for people. It allows them to open doors and use their communication skills to get further in their career.
So thank you to everybody who came along to the seminar today. It was great fun working with them. We look forward to coming back again.
Yes, and congratulations to the winners of the Pink Elephants.
Indeed.